Everyone. We are very happy to be here and present our work. This is joint work with Santiago and Leahy. And today we are going to talk about international monetary transmission mechanism. In particular, how does US interest rate shocks transmit to the rest of the world? Now, if we go back like 30 years, up until maybe 2000s, there was an established consensus in international macroeconomics summarized by Mandel-Fleming framework, according to which you should never touch the exchange rate. So expenditure switching is at the center, and whenever there's a financial shock to your country, exchange rate is going to handle that. In particular, if US raises interest rates, what's going to happen is that your exchange rate is going to depreciate, which is going to allow you to export more. I think so, yeah. No, I think I just did that, and I hit the panel. And I hit the panel, but I think I hit the panel too well. It's not. Here, yeah, we are. Shit. Okay, but in the recent decades, this consensus has started to shift. For one reason, there are some events such as Asian crisis and taper tantrum, which didn't fit the narrative. And there was also a huge literature on this, and among, of course, contributors among you in this room. And what this literature did mostly was to emphasize the financial linkages on one hand, and at the same time, how does this expenditure switching not work? How is this muted? Oops. So what we are going to do, we are going to take a step back. We are going to talk about US monetary policy shocks, and first, how do they affect the US? And our results are going to be in line with the literature, but we are going to emphasize the decline in imports following a US monetary policy shock, and it's going to be at the heart of our analysis. And then we are going to look at the rest of the world, advanced economies and emerging markets, and we are going to see that US monetary policy shocks lead to a large decline in output, especially in emerging markets. And we are going to look at what is the main transmission mechanism. And I guess you guessed what we are going to argue is it's the US import decline is going to be, in our analysis, the main culprit. Let's start with our VAR analysis. We have monthly data. Starting from 2006 to 2019. I mean, our period is a little bit short for two reasons. First, for many emerging markets, data availability is an issue. And second, we want to focus on the recent years because there has been some policy shifting, especially in emerging markets after 2000. So we want to capture the recent trends. We are going to use exogenous identified US monetary policy shocks. We are going to borrow them from Bauer and Swanson. And we are going to use Bayesian VAR with Minnesota priors. For the US, we are going to use standard variables, GDP, PCE, exports, imports, nominal exchange rate. Excess bond premium is going to be important. And for the US interest rate, we are going to use 2-year treasury rates. This is going to also standard. But what we are going to use throughout the paper as the foreign interest rate, as the US treasury rate plus excess bond premium. So what is this excess bond premium? It's what businesses borrow. Is it what businesses pay to borrow excess of US treasuries? So excess bond premium plus US treasury rate would be the interest rate that risk-free borrowers, except the US government, are going to face. So it's going to be our foreign interest rate. This is the US. I don't know whether you can see this. This is very standard. Interest rate go up. We use a somewhat large shock, so interest rate go up by like 2% in annual terms. Excess bond premium goes up. Nominal exchange rate depreciates. GDP goes down, inflation goes down. Imports go down significantly, both imports and exports. This is interesting because from a Mundell-Fleming perspective, if your exchange rate depreciates a lot, yeah, sure, you need to export less, but you should be importing more, but that doesn't seem to happen. That might be in conflict with Mundell-Fleming, but not too much because GDP is slowing down. Maybe there's not much demand. And we actually see that there is not much demand for imported goods because we also have this import price index here. It goes down. So what we observe is that from the perspective of the United States, both imports go down and at the same time, price of imported goods go down. Import price index goes down. So to us, this is an indication that Americans don't want to buy foreign goods anymore. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. How do I? Yeah, great. Now we are going to look at the rest of the world, advanced economies, emerging markets. We are going to use a panel VAR. So we are going to have, for each country, we are going to have the variables here. And on top of each country, we are going to add the US variable as controls. We have 8 advanced economies and 15 emerging markets. We actually increased this number a little bit, but I'm going to show you all results. For the US controls, we only add GDP, R star, and US inflation. Okay? This is advanced economies. We see a depreciation of the nominal exchange rate. So dollar becomes more valuable, local currency depreciates. But as opposed to this, the core of Mundell-Fleming logic, we see a huge decline in exports. I mean, this is really alarming from a Mundell-Fleming perspective. Otherwise, it's standard. GDP goes down somewhat, not too much. Investment somewhat goes down. Advanced economies respond to this shock by lowering interest rates. I mean, to us, what is really surprising about this picture was this nominal exchange rate depreciation and at the same time collapse in exports. I mean, just from a naive perspective, this tells us that, I mean, this picture tells us it's a trade shock. But we will, of course, go into more detail. So this is emerging markets. We see a very similar nominal exchange rate depreciation and also a very similar decline in exports. But at the same time, as opposed to advanced economies, we see a large decline in investment, which tells us that probably financial factors are also important for emerging markets. And GDP decline is pretty large. What we find in the paper, we try many different specifications. What we robustly find is that GDP decline in emerging markets is much larger than decline in advanced economies. And for some specification, GDP decline in emerging market is more than the GDP decline in the US. For some specification, they are similar. And again, clearly what we observe is that investment goes down, export goes down, which drives down GDP. Facts. When US raises interest rates, we see a clear decline in imports, and we see a clear contraction of the rest of the world. We see substantial exchange rate depreciation followed by a reversion. And we see a large output fall in EMEs compared to advanced economies. And in both cases, we see a large decline in exports. And emerging markets seem to use FX interventions a lot. And when we look at, I mean, people talked about this, emerging markets seem to raise interest rates. They follow the Fed a little bit. At the same time, they do FX interventions, while advanced economies seem to cut interest rates more. Now, what we are going to do now is to build a small open economy model in which the US is going to be an exogenous block. What we are going to do is to also take the US VAR that I showed you and then just insert it into our model. And as 3 variables, US interest rates, US GDP, US inflation. We are going to put this VAR into our model as an exogenous block. And then we are going to estimate this model for EMEs and advanced economies. And we are going to try to match these facts. And we will be matching these facts. And our results are going to imply that import demand channel is the main transmission mechanism, as opposed to a pure financial shock coming from the interest rate. But it doesn't mean that financial frictions do not matter. Financial frictions do matter in our framework. In particular, as a response to a trade shock, financial frictions are going to amplify the effect, especially on investment. Standard New Keynesian small open economy model, capital, labor. We are going to export stuff and import stuff from the rest of the world. Let's complicate this model a little bit. First, we are going to add the interest rate parity friction. In our model, households have some non-pecuniary love for their portfolios. They don't want to benefit too much their target portfolio, and this target portfolio is exogenous. Why would they don't want to deviate from their portfolios? It could be habit. It could be also regulation. What our framework is going to get us is something very similar to Gebema, Jury, Tsokimuku, Eichenbaum, Johansen, Rebello. It's just that people are going to be very slow to shift their portfolio, which is going to give us an interest rate spread. At the same time, it's going to allow FX interventions to have an effect. In our model, there's going to be something we call portfolio effect. When US raises interest rates, households will have an incentive to shift their portfolio to dollar assets. And how are they going to do that? By selling local assets. So there's going to be a shift from local currency assets or local capital to dollar assets. And this could actually, by itself, generate a recession in the home country, but we are going to amplify this. We are going to introduce an ad hoc, somewhat flight to safety or low risk appetite type of an assumption, in which this target portfolio that households hold is going to move with R star. So when R star goes up, households have two reasons to shift to dollars. First, because interest rates went up, but also they like dollars even more for some exogenous reasons. But this is going to be important. I'm going to talk about this. Third, we are going to introduce balance sheet effect. We see that in EMEs, there is a significant drop in investment. And what we are going to introduce is that some of the debt held by EME entrepreneurs are going to be denominated in dollars, which is going to introduce balance sheet effects. What happens is that when exchange rate depreciates, these entrepreneurs are going to make losses, and they are the ones who operate the capital, which means that they are not going to be able to operate too much capital, which is going to imply a decline in investment. And this effect can be very large on emerging market investment, as I'm going to show. We are also going to introduce dominant currency paradigm. Export prices are going to be sticky in dollars, which is going to prevent expenditure switching effect. It's going to mute it. It's going to make export response sluggish. We estimate this model using Bayesian impulse response matching. You can ask Leahy for details. I don't want to talk about specifically all these parameters, but what we observe is that the estimated parameters for advanced economies imply a high home bias compared to EMEs. That might be one reason why EMEs are different than advanced economies. So this is our advanced economy fit. I say it's pretty okay. For emerging markets, we have some difficulty matching the large exchange rate depreciation. So overall, our brief summary of our results, we observe large exchange rate depreciations, and our model can match that. And actually, this exchange rate depreciation is so large that the anticipated appreciation followed, it actually implies that the dollar returns are lower. To us, this was a little bit paradoxical. The exchange rate depreciates so much, then you expect that it's going to appreciate, the local currency is going to appreciate, which makes actual dollar returns lower. So in a sense, high R star implies low returns for dollar. And the only way to solve this was to add this flight to safety assumption, this mechanism. In our estimated model, advanced economy output decline is modest, and high home bias is somewhat responsible for that, as well as dollar debt. Advanced economies with low home bias generates a larger decline, and we have this. But our result, we were really surprised to see that in our estimated model, FX interventions are not effective at all. Why? Because in our estimated model, the main shock is coming from the decline in US import. It's not a financial, I mean, it is a financial shock in the firm because it starts with an interest rate shock. But the main mechanism is just people don't want to buy your goods anymore. And FX interventions are not effective against this kind of a shock. But what we find is that against a pure R-star shock, like if you shock this economy with a pure R-star that doesn't affect the export demand, FX interventions are effective. Or if we consider UIP shocks, like noise trading shocks, again, FX interventions are effective. But what I am going to show you now is that this pure R-star shocks, the output decline is going to be much modest compared to the role of the decline in US imports. And we also have a set of parameters and estimation results for Peru. Peru is an interesting country because they officially intervene in the FX market. And the idea that they want to smooth exchange rates fluctuations because they have a lot of dollar debt, etc. But again, we observe that against US monetary policy shocks, this FX intervention is not effective. Yeah. So what we are going to do now is to decompose this US monetary policy shock into three components. And there's a pure interest rate aspect that the cost of capital goes up. People want to shift their portfolio to dollars. Second, GDP declines in the US. So Americans don't want to buy your goods anymore. Third, US inflation goes down, which makes American goods cheaper. So they don't want to buy your goods again. What we observe in both EMEs and advanced economies is that GDP decline is mostly due to the decline in US GDP. But it doesn't mean that financial frictions are not important. They are still important for the transmission of this trade shock. So this is our advanced economy decomposition. So the blue line is our benchmark. Black line is pure R-star shock. And red line is pure GDP shock. And as you see, GDP decline is more or less the same across benchmark, the whole everything together, and only US GDP. And then, of course, it comes from the exports. And for advanced economies, investment was not moving much, and consumption is not moving either much. So for advanced economies, everything is coming from, oops, 1 minute, okay. Everything is coming from export. For emerging markets, again, it's the same graph. Decline is mostly coming from US GDP decline. But again, R-star shock leads to somewhat, decline in investment as well. So the last graph I'm going to show you is that this is a pure trade shock. The interest rates are not moving. Foreign interest rates are not moving. Blue line is our benchmark model. Black line is when we shut down dollar debt and portfolio frictions. So in the black line, UIP holds. And what we see is that across these two perturbations, investment decline is significantly large, following a trade shock in a country with financial frictions. So financial frictions do matter for the transmission of US monetary policy shocks. It's just that the main shock is the trade shock. In this paper, what we show is that US monetary policy shocks leads to a US slowdown and US import decline. And our results suggest that this import decline is the main transmission mechanism, how US interest rate shocks transmit to the rest of the world. But this impact is also shaped by financial frictions. And our results might shed light on the current puzzle that, in the past 2 years, 3 years, US interest rates have been rising like crazy, and we don't see any large crises in EMEs. Well, because US imports are not declining. And that will be our answer. And thank you very much.